Hello everyone, my name is Rachel, aka Pencil Butter, and today I'm going to share with you guys some basic techniques for blending with alcohol markers. Okay, so before I get started, there are a few things that you need to keep in mind when using alcohol markers. Generally, the type of marker you use doesn't matter. The only major difference between alcohol markers is going to be the different types of nibs. Some have brush nibs, which do aid in getting smoother blending, but they're really not necessary. So for this tutorial, I'm just going to be using the normal sketch markers with the chisel nib and the normal bullet nib, just to show that you can get really nice blending without that brush nib. But it is handy if you do have it. Another thing to keep in mind is the type of paper you're using. Some papers do allow for much smoother blending, and some like to hold on to the ink and don't let it move around quite as much on the paper. So for me personally, because I like to do a lot of heavy blending and lots of layers, I prefer something thicker like a cardstock or Bristol. But the type of paper you use depends completely on your art style and your personal needs. So today I'm going to go over two different methods of blending with you guys. The first is going to be working from light to dark, laying out a base color and then adding your shadows on top of it. The second method is going to be from dark to light, starting with shadows and then blending it out with your lighter colors. That's the method that I normally use, but a lot of people tend to default to the light to dark method, so I'm going to show you guys that one first. So since I'm starting off with the light to dark method, for this coloring method, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your lightest color and you're just going to lay out a base over your entire area that you want to be this color. Now, if you're having trouble and you notice your marker is streaking really bad, that means that you're just like moving too fast. You need to kind of slow down and work in smaller areas and just let the marker lay down a little more ink. Another thing to keep in mind when you're laying out large areas of flat color like this is to not be afraid of this chisel nib. Too often I see marker artists just avoid this nib completely because they don't think it's useful for blending. But even a brush nib will not give you as solid of a color layout as that chisel nib. Alright, now that I've got that color laid out, I'm going to take my second color, which is the CG6, and I'm going to add my sort of mid-tone shadows. Alright, now you can see at this point there is a harsh line between my base color and my mid-tone here. But what we're going to do to blend that out is to go back in with our base color here and just sort of smooth it back out. Now, this is where brush markers come in handy because they allow you to feather your strokes and you don't get that harsh line, so it's a lot easier to blend out. Alright, next I'm going to take my darkest color here and just kind of add my darkest shadows. Now I'm just taking my mid-tone and blending out that darkest color. When you're going over a darker color with a lighter one, you do want to make sure you cover the entire area, just because if you don't, it'll leave like a weird line where the lighter color is pushing that darker one. So, but sometimes that can wash out your darker colors. So if you feel the need to kind of go back in and touch up certain areas or blend something a little more, if you find there's a spot that's not blending quite as well, you can concentrate your ink there and just kind of work it until it starts to fade. Okay, now the next method I'm going to show you is the method that I normally use. This is just a personal preference. It doesn't make it right or wrong. Is to work from dark to light. I lay out my darkest shadows first and then work up to my base color. So the first thing I'm going to do is lay out where I want my deepest shadows to be. So now I'm going to take my next color and blend this out. And at the same time that I'm blending out my darkest color, I'm also laying out my midtones here. Now, it's better to do this while that first color is still really wet. Markers do tend to move around on the paper a little bit better and blend a little smoother if your ink is still wet. Again, if there's an area that you notice just isn't blending quite as well as some of the others, just kind of focus your attention there for a little while. You don't want to overwork it and saturate the paper too much, especially if you're kind of on your beginning layers, but don't be afraid to, let out a little more ink onto the paper to get a smooth gradient. I have had people tell me before, oh, but that's just wasting so much ink. And in my opinion, it's better to use more ink and have a really, really nice looking final product than it is to save on that ink and have something that is streaky or not blended quite as smoothly. Alright, so now I'm going to take my lightest color again, my CG2, and again, I am blending out this mid-tone, and at the same time, I'm laying down the areas for my base colors here. Okay, so like I said last time, when you go over the darker colors with the lighter ones, you do tend to wash out these darker colors. So I'm going to just kind of work back and forth, touching up my darker colors and blending them back out with the lighter ones. Okay, so there you have it. Here's your two basic methods of blending with alcohol markers. It doesn't really matter which method you use. All that matters is that it's the method that is most comfortable for you. They really produce extremely similar results, so it doesn't really matter. One is not any better than the other. Both of these methods work with any alcohol marker that you're using. It doesn't matter if it's a chisel nib, brush nib, bullet. It doesn't really matter what type of marker it is. The inks and how they work are pretty much the same with alcohol markers across the board. So I hope you all found this little tutorial helpful, and I will see you all in my next video.